This scary story is about a young man named Shin. That day, Shin, together with his uncle, went outside to dig a lake for fish farming. They had to finish it before the wet season arrived. The soil here was pretty stony, which made both Shin and his uncle feel wearily. As the two were digging, Shin discovered a pile of soil protruding from the ground, which looked like a grave. Shin immediately informed his uncle about it. The uncle was amazed as Shin pointed at the spot for him to see. The uncle thought for a moment, then told Shin, "We should go check on it." The dirt pile was actually a huge lump of soil. Shin and his uncle had to lift it up and put it aside. Shin and the uncle were surprised to see the thing underneath it. The uncle told Shin, "Who on earth would bury such a statue down here?" The statue had a human face shape which looked like that of a woman. It was beautifully crafted. The two were extremely curious to know about its origin. The uncle closely looked at the statue and then told Shin to help him dig it up. The two started digging. They had a firm belief that the statue was something highly valued. The face of the statue slowly appeared under the layer of dirt. It was a gorgeous female that had the beauty of an Asian woman. As the two raised it up, Shin was astounded by its great beauty. The uncle carefully looked at the statue. All of a sudden, at the moment he looked into the eyes of the statue, he got startled. Eyes dilated with horror. He backed up instantly, which made Shin surprised. The man's voice trembled with fear. He told Shin, "We are going to die." Shin didn't understand what had happened to his uncle. The old man stuttered, hurriedly told Shin to bring the statue deeper into the forest. Despite being confused, Shin obediently did what the uncle told him to do without disposing it. Yet he asked his uncle what had happened. The uncle said nothing, as he told Shin to quickly bury it. The two brought the statue to a spot deep into the forest. They dig a hole, then put it aside. The uncle then covered it up. He couldn't stop being scared. As the man buried the statue, he muttered something under his breath, begging for forgiveness. The statue was covered with layers of dirt. Never in Shin's life had he seen his uncle being this scared. How strange it was. The statue was just an inanimate object. After the two buried the statue, they quickly returned home. That night the weather unexpectedly got colder as blasts of cold wind howled. As the uncle was in his sleep, he suddenly opened his eyes. There were sounds of footsteps outside. The man slowly went step by step, not to wake his wife up. As he went to a window, he drew the curtain aside to gaze. His nephew Shin was seen opening the gate and going outside. He walked clumsily, looking like a sleepwalker. The uncle wondered what Shin was doing out there this late. Sensing something bad about to happen, the man put on his jacket, then followed Shin. The uncle felt suspicious as he saw Shin acting strange. The door was left open when Shin went out of the house. He didn't even bother to close it. But scarier than that, Shin had completely disappeared into the pitch darkness. How could he move so fast? At that time there was no one else on the streets, only utter silence prevailed. The old man looked around. He checked every single corner, yet his nephew was nowhere to be seen. Then a disturbing thought crossed his mind, which terrified him deeply. He quickly made his way to the forest. Like a shudder premonition, the uncle's face was pale and filled with horror as he wanted to find Shin before the sun came up. What the man expected turned out to be true as he saw Shin sitting on the spot where the two buried the statue. Shin was on his knees digging up something. The uncle watched his nephew for a moment. He called Shin, but Shin didn't reply to him. He slowly approached them. Terrifyingly, both hands of Shin were badly wounded as blood was dribbling from them, while the statue was slowly revealed under the dirt. Feeling horrified, the uncle yelled loudly at Shin, telling him to stop. However, despite his uncle trying to stop him, the young man just kept digging and digging. His face became scary as he put on a haunting smile. The uncle acted quickly as he grabbed Shin and dragged him away from the spooky statue. But the strange thing was, as Shin was being kept from the statue, he screamed painfully, then attacked his uncle. Shin screamed hysterically while rushing to the statue, continuously called it his wife. His scream echoed throughout the whole forest in the black night. The uncle struggled desperately to get Shin out of the forest and return him home. Inside a small house with the lights on, Shin acted insanely to his uncle and aunt's amazement. He was sitting on his bed, hugging a pillow while smiling happily. The young man even cuddled it as if it was his lover. Having no other choice, the uncle had to tell his wife about his encounter with the spooky statue. The wife couldn't hide the horror on her face. She asked him if it was the haunting statue that the villagers had been talking about all those years. Shin indeed had been possessed, which meant the myths about his statue were all true. Since the statue had aimed for the young man, he would be haunted to death. The woman then told her husband to hurriedly find a black dog in order to remove the spirit out of Shin by using the old ways their ancestors had taught them. She also emphasized that the dog must be an old one, as it would be more effective for the incantation. Immediately the uncle ran to the nearby village to get himself an old black dog. The old man then returned with the dog as he saw his wife impatiently waiting for him. The dog fixed its eyes on the bed that Shin was sitting on, then growled as if something had caught its attention. It barked loudly afterwards. A tense atmosphere soon prevailed in the house. Shin felt horror as he trembled helplessly. The man stepped backwards while holding his pillow, looking terrified. As the man was in terrible fear, he bursted out crying loudly, then fainted shortly after that as the dog stopped barking at him. Feeling extremely worried, the aunt quickly checked up on Shin. She called out his name and prayed for him to pull through. The uncle couldn't hide the worried expression on his face either. Luckily, Shin had eventually woken. The aunt couldn't be happier to see him making it out alive, but Shin was still in utter bewilderment. He asked her, "What's happened? Why am I lying here?" Then he grabbed his head and groaned as he felt an immense pain. The young man looked down at his hands. He was shocked to see them being covered with wounds and scratches. They also bled while the fingertips were badly swollen. The uncle and his wife looked at Shin, then asked what had happened with him. But even Shin himself couldn't remember exactly what the situation he had gotten into be this terrible. All he could remember was this one dream coming into his mind as he tried to recall it and tell it to his uncle. He said he was awoken by a female voice. The voice echoed distantly as it aroused his curiosity. He unconsciously followed it. The moment he got attracted by the voice was also the moment he opened the gate and went outside. It's like there was some kind of a mysterious force that took him over. The young man heedlessly made his way to the forest, followed the path he and his uncle had been on before that day. From afar, Shin saw a shadow moving around the spot where he and his uncle had buried the statue. She flew mid-air whilst emitting a green light, looking eerie. The woman then rushed to Shin. She stroked his face and slowly tempted him while the man was fondling her. The woman went to behind Shin. She grabbed him tightly, which made him unable to move. Then she stuck out her long tongue, which looked like that of a snake, and licked Shin by his neck. The woman later came out as a female demon. She bared her yellow sharp teeth and intended to bite him by the neck. At that moment, Shin was completely being controlled. Out of nowhere, a black dog showed up. It barked loudly, which frightened the two. The female ghost then disappeared into the pitch darkness of the forest, leaving him with utter confusion. Shin couldn't help but being scared as he recalled his nightmare. The aunt told him that it wasn't just a dream of his, it had actually happened in real life, and the fact that he was still here was because of her husband finding him out in the forest and bringing him home. Shin was astounded. He wondered who the female ghost was and why it went to him. The uncle was filled with horror, as he told Shin it was a female ghost in folk myth, one that had been staying inside the statue. Shin couldn't figure out why the ghost had targeted him, what exactly had happened to the woman before, and how did his uncle and his aunt know so much about her? The uncle then told Shin about the legend of the statue. Back when he was still a young kid in the village, there was this widow who was gorgeous, yet being a temptress. The woman always seduced men in the village, as anyone went past her house would be tempted by her sweet words. Needless to say, all the men in the village were in love with her. They neglected their wives and families, as some even gave all their properties to the young beautiful widow. Many women in the village held their grudge towards her, as they believed she was the reason their families were breaking apart. One day they gathered in front of her house, yelling and smashing, while the gorgeous widow stayed in her house, hiding from them. As it struck midnight, they stealthily burned down her house. The fire broke out very fast. It swept through the small log house in just a blink of an eye. The woman, together with the house, had been burned to ashes. No one was responsible for the death of the woman. As time went by, things eventually became forgotten. One night there was this drunken man going home late as he looked warily. All of a sudden he saw a figure slowly approaching him. Its creepy shape quickly sobered him up. The man that got startled, he collapsed on the ground. It was a woman who was horrifically burnt. There were only a few strands of hair to be seen on her head. She dilated her white eyes wide open, her mouth as if she wanted to say something. Knowing it was the woman's spirit, the villagers later invited a shaman to send it away from the village, but it didn't work at all. The ghostly female still wandered around, scaring the villagers. What was even more terrifying, the ghost always stalked men who usually went outside at night. Later became a horror to the villagers at that time. However, the ghost could be driven away with a black dog, as it instantly backed away and disappeared if it saw one. Knowing the weakness of the female ghost, the villagers had taken in black dogs to protect their families from her. That was also the reason why there were so many black dogs in the village. Because of deep hatred, the widow's spirit had become a demon which always craved the vitality of men. Since she wanted to remain her beauty, the woman had turned herself into a statue which was uttered with a deadly curse that said any young man who found the statue would be haunted. Since then, the myths about the widow statue had been established. As the uncle finished his story, the sun had already come up. Shin felt a shiver as he listened to his uncle telling the story. The uncle didn't tell anyone about the incident, since he didn't want the villagers to gossip about it. The old man later made a warning to his kids not to go near the spot where he buried the statue. That year the drought was severe, so the place where I lived had lost the crop. Our family has moved to another place to live, hoping for it to be better. This is an old house, consisting of many rooms, all built in architecture. It looks slightly dusty and messy, but better than nothing. My father said to clean. The whole family can live here too, because this is the house of a deceased friend left for his father. So the whole family cleaned up. More than half finished, the house was also a lot tidier. That night, the three of us slept together. My older sister was about 15 years old at that time, and I was my second sister. At that time, I was only 10 years old. Behind me was Chi, 6 years old. But for some reason, I was struggling and unable to sleep. I felt a sense of insecurity from the next room. The room is ancient. My family is not using it, so I haven't cleaned it up yet. That word kept emitting a creepy feeling. Losing sleep for a long time, I also gradually fell asleep. But not yet profound, I heard chuckles emanating from that room. laughter growing louder. The door slowly opened. I began to panic but still tried to stay silent in bed. And then out of the room suddenly came out two girls, white faces, white eyes, and a strange smile. What scared me the most was that their feet weren't touching the ground. They were floating with red shoes. I panicked but still tried to close my eyes and pretend I was sleeping as they slowly approached my mirror. I felt cold and their gaze were on my three sisters. I don't know what they're going to do to us. I just laid there without moving. They kept whispering and smiling horribly. It seemed like they were choosing something. I was too young to notice the problem. In the end, it seemed like they chose me. I could feel a terrible cold hand touching my body. I tried to open my eyes slowly to look at the two sleeping next to me, hoping they would wake up to save me. But they were almost in a deep sleep, not knowing what I was facing. I glanced at them, but what I saw was genuinely awful. They're just two dry bones with old clothes. They were standing right behind me and seemingly tried to pull me somewhere. I was so scared. I hurriedly pulled the covers over my body and then fell asleep without realizing it. In the morning, everything was still as usual, but I still do not dare to open the blanket. After a while, little Lily woke me up when she saw that I wouldn't wake up. I quickly woke up, got out of my bed and blanket, and shouted about the two women who came out from that room last night. But my older sister may not believe what I said. She thought it was because I had a nightmare. No matter how I clung and cried, my sisters still doubted and didn't believe what I said. I recounted everything I experienced last night to her and hoped Nissan will come and take a look inside that room with a frightened expression. After hearing my mourning, Nissan reluctantly walked over to the room to examine the interior to reassure me that there was nothing inside. And indeed, Nissan opened the door of the room so I could come and see inside. Even though I was still terrified, I still walked over to her, hands clasping on Nissan and looking around inside the room. This is an old room, messy and thick. As my older sister said, there's no one inside. Maybe I'm dreaming. Because he waited for us for so long, my dad came in and saw three sisters standing in front of the other room door, so he urged us to come out for breakfast and asked what was going on. The oldest sister told him what I told her, and also told my dad that we went to see the room, but it's completely normal with no one inside. After hearing that, my father scolded us because just because of a stupid dream and not going to breakfast, my parents had to go to the fields to work. After breakfast, my second sister and my parents went to the field to harvest potatoes. Baby Lily is young, so she cannot accompany us. But since this is a peaceful countryside, we were not afraid for Lily. After a while, rain started pouring down. We also drove the baskets of potatoes home. The cart got a lot heavier because this year the potatoes had a good harvest. We help each other, carry each basket of potatoes into the house. This year we'll make a lot of money. I also gradually forgot about yesterday's horror. The rain was getting heavier and heavier, so we quickly loaded the potatoes inside. Otherwise, they would be waterlogged. As soon as we opened the door and looked into the house, we saw little Lily playing in the yard, seemingly very happy. My mother was worried because of the heavy rain that little Lily could still play in front of the yard, but refused to go to the house to shelter from the rain. My mother was afraid she would fall sick. But little Lily seemed highly excited and told her mother that she was enjoying herself with her beautiful sisters. In response to my mother's question, I gradually realized what was unusual. And it seemed what little Lily said was true. There were lots of shoe marks on the ground. She was playing with someone in the yard of the house. That night, out of panic about the night before, I asked to let me sleep with my parents. Even though nothing strange had happened all night,
I was apprehensive about some nervous feeling that I could not sleep. The following day, as well as every day, the whole family sat together for breakfast. But Lily didn't eat anything, even when my parents told her to. My parents asked that little Lily said that she would be taken away to eat well by some beautiful sisters. The carefree words of a child did not make my parents too concerned. That day we also needed to go to the fields. As usual, my mother was afraid that a stranger would come to seduce Lily, so she told her not to open the door for anyone to come in. At that time I was a child, so I didn't know what happened. I just felt a little insecure. So I asked my mother to bring Lily along with me that day. But my father seemed annoyed by it because little Lily often ran and jumped. It would take time to watch. The whole family would not be able to concentrate on farming. Everyone in the family was afraid of my father, so according to my father's instructions, it would not be a problem to lock the door carefully. My mother also thought so, so she obeyed my father. I'm alone in discomfort, but I'm too young to give my opinion. Before the door closed, I still remember clearly now, her white face, dark eyes and strange smile of Lily. She looked at me like a farewell. After that we got into the familiar cart and left the house. After the field work, we could not see Lily playing in the yard anymore. When we came back home, it was strange that my mother called Lily repeatedly. After entering the house to search, my mother frantically ran out to inform everyone. The whole family was shocked. We split up to look for Lily. The older sister and I were worried about her. We ran around the village to see if anyone knew anything. My father entered the other strange room to search for her, and I was hoping that Lily was just playing hide and seek. But to our dread, little Lily was truly missing. After that we stayed for a bit longer, then eventually decided to leave the heartbreaking place and move to a neighboring village. Years later, when I was much older, I heard that people came to clean and break the house down for farmland. Suddenly, while breaking down the fence, they accidentally bumped into something that seemed hard below the ground, so they decided to dig down to take a look below. After a while of digging, they discovered a big wooden coffin, which surprised everyone because ordinary coffins could not be that big. They opened the lid of the coffin to examine the interior and took the remains of the deceased so they could be buried somewhere else. All this so that the dead would have a proper place to rest. The coffin was indeed huge, holding at least 3 to 4 people. They also worked very hard to be able to open the lid to close the inside. But what was inside surprised them, and the story spread everywhere, which led my family to learn the reason why little Lily disappeared so mysteriously. Inside the coffin were the corpses of 2 women and a child. They were placed very neatly inside of it, and just like the workers described, there was a little baby girl who fitted the exact same description as Lily. The 2 women had turned to white bones, but the child looked like she had died recently. At that time, as I was older, I could speak my mind and realized Lily should have never been the one to get caught, because the one who should have gotten caught should have been me. The peaceful village became busier than usual that morning. People reported to the police early on, and they quickly arrived here to investigate a case that occurred. According to the person who reported the crime, The murder took place in the house directly ahead. The police department blocked the crime scene quickly. Boss Lu Feng and Captain Chow also put on gloves in preparation for an inspection. They were very attentive around the room from the moment they entered the door, because all murder cases would have clues from the surrounding objects. Boss Lu Feng commended the captain to split up to investigate. He would go inside while the captain checked around the house. Captain Chow examined the scene carefully, but there were almost no hints, so he returned inside the house to report to Boss Lu Feng. But the scene in front of him, that was both heartbreaking and frightening. On the ceiling right now was a woman who appeared to have hanged herself, and there was an odd detail. On her feet, she was wearing a pair of red shoes that were very intricately embroidered. Whereas her family was an ordinary farmer family who dressed very simple. Boss Lu Feng immediately called the person who reported the case to ask for clarification. Boss Lu Feng was curious as to how he was able to discover the body inside this house. Because the door was locked, it was difficult to see inside. He stated that he was always watching because he had a crush on the victim and he had not seen her leaving the house since a few days, so he was concerned. As a result, he leaned out the door to inspect the inside. While looking for the girl, he was discovered by two of her relatives. They thought he was a thief, so they confiscated him to get clarification. However, after explaining that he was concerned about the girl, he peered inside to see how she was doing. Her relatives were concerned after not seeing her for 2 days and came here to find out what had happened. When her uncle opened the door and walked inside, he panicked and was screaming while rushing out the room. Only then people rushed in to learn that the girl had hanged herself. After hearing him explain, Boss Lu Feng temporarily believed him and ordered the police to bring her body down. And didn't forget to instruct them to be cautious and keep the body in its current state for forensic examination. The girl's body was then carried out, ready to be returned to the police station. She was still wearing a pair of red shoes embroidered with red flowers. However, an elderly woman in the crowd was watching, and when she saw the girl's body, she panicked and her face was darkened. Because of her abnormal appearance, Boss Lu Feng began to keep an eye on her. The entire team met at the headquarters to investigate the case. Was it true that the girl committed suicide? And the people who were intimately involved were also the ones who discovered the girl's body. The boss directed to investigate all the people who were close to the girl, including the man who followed her. Captain Chow dashed out the door to inform everyone in a rush. They could find out the reason for the girl's death. The odd thing was that it could be related to previous hanging cases that happened. Captain Chow believed that these cases are out of the ordinary. "Sir, I believe this case was connected to a curse." Boss Lu Feng was taken aback. "Another witchcraft case?" Captain Chow explained to his boss what he had learned from the elderly woman who had reacted strangely the day before as soon as they started to go back to the crime scene. Before that, there was a girl in the village whose husband died young and was unable to work hard, so she chose to sleep with men to earn money. But she was discovered by a woman in the village. They came to beat her and scratched her face in order to prevent her from seducing men in the future. They shaved her hair and ruined her face, then abandoned her in the middle of the street. She then hanged herself in her house. She was already dead when people found her, and she was wearing the same red embroidered shoes which appeared at the crime scene recently. She seemed to die unjustly, so she left a curse on the wall. "If I become a ghost, I will return for revenge." All of the participants who abused the girl were terrified of the ghost's vengeance. Indeed, each of them committed suicide by hanging themselves. especially when they die. On their feet were the red embroidered shoes that the girl wore when she died. Boss Lu Feng didn't believe this was the work of the devil. As a result, he directed the captain to look into the relatives of the girls who committed suicide to see if there were any leads. He reasoned that this could have been arranged by the girls' relatives. When she died, they might have exacted their vengeance on her behalf. After a day of investigation, the most suspicious person was the husband of the recently deceased girl. He used to sleep with the girl who was beaten by his wife. He was also the person next to his wife when she committed suicide. As a result, he was immediately taken back to the station to obtain a bow. He initially just played around and pretended not to be related to the case, but when Captain Chow became enraged, he was then obeyed to tell everything. He stated that he did not murder anyone. It was because the other girl's ghost appeared in the middle of the night and murdered his wife. His wife woke up in the middle of the night while sleeping and went off to bed. Despite the fact that he called, she did not answer. Suddenly he noticed a pair of red shoes floating in mid-air in front of his wife, and his wife was staring at them unconsciously. The shoes then moved as if inviting his wife to put them on. And, as being hypnotized, she wore them on her feet. She then began to get out of bed. He was so terrified that he couldn't move. All he could do was call out her name, which didn't work. His wife approached a wooden plank on the ceiling that a piece of cordage were tied on since. And then came what may, she began to fly up, floating in mid-air and approaching the cordage. And with that, she flew closer to the rope. Then she put her head in the noose. He was shocked when he saw his wife die so quickly before he could react. By the time his wife was hanged, he was about to take her down. Suddenly, a wooden chair appeared out of nowhere, striking him in the face, making him dizzy. Then, panicked, he looked in the direction of the chair. The sight in front terrified him. All of the furniture in the house was floating upwards. He was terrified to death after seeing that, and because the wound on his face was so painful, he stopped paying attention to his wife. As a result, he fled from home, unconcerned about whether his wife was dead or alive. He finally had the courage to return with a few villagers in the next morning. The interrogation was finished, and both Captain and Boss Lu Feng believed he wasn't the murderer. But what he said was unreal. They needed more concrete evidence. The two of them then went to the cemetery where the victim's body was buried to look for any clues. When they arrived at the location, they both sought out the cemetery keeper to inquire about the grave. This cemetery guard turns out to be the man who snooped in front of the girl's house the day he discovered her suicide. He agreed to lead everyone to a grave after a few inquiries. And Boss Lu Feng didn't forget to ask if anything out of the ordinary had happened recently. He also talked a lot about the girl along the way, but all of those clues were already investigated by the police. But there was one strange thing. He pointed to the girl's grave and inquired whether the cops had seen anything. Captain Chow simply stated that the grave was typical. However, Boss Lu Feng, who has extensive experience, discovered something unusual. He sat down slowly and picked up a cake that was being offered at the grave. And he informed Captain Chow that this cake was strange. Because this type of cake was only available in the neighboring village, the police had asked all of the girls' relatives not to leave the village while the case was being investigated. As a result, Captain Chow began investigating the cake's origins right away. He eventually discovered the only shop that sold this type of cake. Boss Lu Feng and the captain dressed casually and went to the site to look for more clues. However, the vending cart did not pique the interest of Boss Lu Feng, but the theater behind it with a large billboard made him feel more likely to find clues in it. There was a billboard outside the theater advertising a well-known magician. The show was taking place inside. Captain Chow was told by Boss Lu Feng to keep an eye on the magician. The two entered. The show had begun. Boss Lu Feng had a hunch that this magician had a problem. The magician started to greet everyone before performing a few small tricks. Then came today's most expected performance. It was about being able to make people and objects levitate. He managed to levitate all of his gadgets, including his co-star. Captain Chow was taken aback and jumped up, as the method was similar to that of the Red Shoes case. Boss Lu Feng advised him to be more cautious and keep an eye out for this magician in order to avoid waking a sleeping dog. The two people waited for him until he finished his performance. Seeing the presence of the cops, he also obediently put his hands in the handcuffs. He had no intention of covering up his crime at the police station, knowing that everything had been exposed. He maintained a calm demeanor while speaking. He admitted everything. He did it because he loved the girl and wanted all the others to suffer and pay for what they did. After that, he continued that those victims deserved to die, and that it was simply a poetic justice. In the end, he was sentenced to death for the murder of 3 people. Boss Lu Feng speculated that he committed such a crime because he was too enamored with the victim. It was a story about a guy named Karma whose eyes could see ghosts. He made a living as a shaman and earned an income with his special ability. Today it was the weekend, but someone unexpectedly appeared outside. The door was opened by Karma's friend Ken, who was living in the same house. A man with an emaciated and tired face appeared in front of Ken. He inquired whether Karma was at home, but Ken did not respond directly. Instead, he invited the visitor to come in first. Seeing the young man's awkwardness, Ken pointed to the room ahead and said that Karma was in the room. The young man entered Karma's room with a slight smile to express his gratitude to Ken. After exchanging greetings, Karma knew that the guy was working for a nightclub. He came to see him because he had a very strange dream. Due to time constraints, the young man went straight to the point and told Karma about his dream. In his dreams, he always saw a woman crying bitterly in the corner of the room. He felt sorry for the girl and planned to visit her to console her and ask her questions. But as he got closer, the woman became agitated and would come over to strangle him. The girl's expression frightened him even more. A white face with no eyes. Flesh that has rotted and peeled into patches as if it was decomposing. After listening to Karma, he felt that the woman certainly had many twists and turns. To find out more information, Karma asked the guy if she said anything. The man immediately waved his hand, indicating that he knew nothing about her. Because the man didn't dare to approach when he saw the terrifying face, he couldn't dare to ask her anything. At the time, the man came to meet Karma solely to request that he take care of the ghost as soon as possible. He didn't get a good night's sleep as a result of the nightmare. After hearing what he had to say, Karma laughed lightly and imagined that the woman had been killed unjustly and had come to see him in his dream to ask for his assistance. After hearing what had happened, the man became concerned because he had never had the courage to approach the woman and thus would not be able to assist her in resolving any injustice. Finally, Karma stood up and agreed to assist the man. Only he had the ability to communicate with the girl in the situation. The two of them immediately went out. When they were walking across the living room, Karma had the sudden desire to ask Ken to solve the problem. Ken had always been fascinated by ghosts, so when Karma asked him, he had no reason to refuse. The three of them quickly arrived at the man's bar. The bar was on the 4th floor of a building with a nightclub beneath it. Previously, the building was a hotel with a nightclub beneath it. Later, for the sake of convenience, some rooms on the 4th floor were converted into rooms for staff. After opening the door, Karma went around to assess the situation inside the room. With his special abilities, he could sense that the room was haunted. He immediately squatted in the middle of the room and scribbled some strange characters on the floor with a pen. After finishing the letters, Karma reached into his pocket and pulled out a bag of red liquid, a pair of chopsticks, and a candle. These were all tools he had learned to use in order to perform mystical rituals. When the man brought the requested bowl, Karma immediately took the bag containing the red liquid and poured it into the bowl, which he placed in the center of the pre-written letters. Then he folded the two chopsticks into a cross and placed them on top of the bowl before placing the candle on the chopsticks. As he prepared to finish the seance ritual, Karma stood up and smiled wickedly at the two confused people behind him, informing them that the woman would appear. When Karma said this, the other men's heartbeats quickened in fear. Ken, on the other hand, had complete faith in Karma, knowing that no matter how terrifying a woman's ghost was, he could handle it. The owner, on the other hand, was desperate to get rid of the girl, so even though the situation was tense, he gritted his teeth and persevered. When Karma shut all the doors and turned off the lights, the atmosphere in the room became quiet and gloomy. There was only one candle left lit in the room at the time. The light from the candle illuminated the room slightly. At the time, Karma took out a cloth puppet and tied a rope around its head. One of his hands grasped the other end of the rope, which was holding a puppet to the candle's head. The puppet's shadow was reflected on the wall by candlelight. It began as the shadow of a puppet, but after a few minutes, the shadow grew larger and moved to form an adult on its own. Ken, who witnessed the scene, was too terrified to say anything. A face began to emerge from the blank shadow. It slowly emerged from the surface of the wall, looking as alive as if it was real. The face came first, followed by the rest of the body. The young man and Ken were terrified and felt like fleeing. The sight of a woman stepping out from behind the wall was unbelievable. As for the man, his face was still stunned, unable to say anything, and he was only able to stare at the woman. Because she was the woman who appeared frequently in his dreams, the woman's expression, however, did not match the man's description. She appeared gentler and stood still, staring at Karma until he spoke first. Hearing Karma's promise to assist in restoring justice, the woman began to cry and shared her story. The woman's name was Aiku. Because of her poor family circumstances, she dropped out of school early to work in order to earn money. At the time, her mother was seriously ill and needed a sum of money to get medical treatment urgently. She went with an introduction to meet a wealthy individual who could lend her a large sum of money without charging interest. Seeing Aiku's beauty and pleading, the boss quickly agreed to loan Aiku the money and asked her to pay it back within 2 years. After that, Aiku began working around the clock in the hopes of paying off all her debts, but an incident occurred not long ago. The boss summoned Aiku to a private room one night because he needed to speak with her about something. Aiku noticed her boss blushing and knew right away that he had been drinking heavily. At the point, he motioned for her to take a seat beside him. Because Aiku couldn't refuse, she sat next to him while hearing about the debt she had from the boss. His statement caused Aiku to panic and she did not dare to look at him. According to the agreement, she would pay the full amount after 2 years, but there was no deadline to repay the debt at the time. The boss immediately laughed and pointed to the wine bottle on the table, telling her that if she drank the bottle of wine, all her debts would be forgiven. When Aiku heard his statements, she felt both happy and worried. After that, Aiku decided to pick up the bottle, tilt her head backwards and take a few drinks until the bottle ran out. Aiku's stomach became tense and uncomfortable after consuming a full bottle of wine. Nonetheless, she tried to calmly place the bottle of wine on the table and politely asked the boss to keep his promise because she had met the conditions he set. When her boss saw what was going on, he was taken aback because he had previously underestimated her. The boss believed that the money could make Aiku do whatever he wanted. He tried to seduce her into selling her body to him. Even though Aiku was inebriated and irritated by alcohol, she was fully aware. She realized her boss's intentions and became embarrassed and enraged. Because she was a kind person, she refused to sell herself for money, so she did not hesitate to slap the boss to express her displeasure. The boss's face was expressionless as he was brutally beaten, but his attitude quickly shifted, and he became enraged as a result of Aiku's actions. He couldn't keep his rage in check and immediately raised his foot, kicking Aiku to the ground. He even summoned his people to come in and beat Aiku mercilessly. After a while, the poor girl was eventually beaten to death. Despite knowing that the junior's actions went beyond their original intentions, he decided to handle her until the end. At the time, there was an empty room upstairs that was rarely used, so the boss hid Aiku's body there and converted it into a staff room. Karma couldn't help but sigh and lament the unfortunate girl. However, the fact that she knew who the enemy was without seeking vengeance in order for her to be freed made him wonder. It was not that Aiku didn't want to leave, but something in the room was keeping her from doing so. Karma did not respond. Instead, he went to the door to look around and look for the main door frame. Karma eventually found a pair of scissors on the door frame. The boss managed to seal Aiku's spirit inside the room due to his fear of retaliation from her soul. Karma turned to face Aiku, held up the scissors in his hand and told her that now there was nothing to stop her. She could do whatever she wanted. When Aiku finished listening, Aiku smiled contently. The ghost of Aiku slowly exited the room and vanished. In the next day, the young man rushed to inform Karma of the shocking news. The boss had a freak accident and went insane after being avenged by a so-called ghost girl. It was exactly what he deserved in retaliation for his crimes. The story was about a friend of mine, Hiro. He and I were two very close friends and we told each other everything. At the time, I heard that he had a girlfriend, but he still didn't introduce her to friends, so I asked. But instead of being happy, he seemed to scowl at me because his girlfriend recently had bad luck and her health was not good. He couldn't introduce her to friends. The couple had only known each other for a few months. Hiro's girlfriend was named Umi. She was an office worker with a relatively pretty appearance, but she had a strange hobby of wearing wigs. Maybe because her real hair was very thinning, she was self-deprecating about it. Moreover, wigs were also very convenient, so she could change the style at any time she liked. Umi had always been collecting pretty hair for a long time. That time she also bought another set. That time the new hairstyle was a bit more special than the old ones. She was very satisfied and always wore it every time she went out the house. She even wore it to work. All the colleagues she met complimented her look. Thanks to her hair, she looked prettier. Her long, smooth black hair didn't look like a wig at all. It made Umi very pleased, but her face didn't look very happy, because since having a new wig, Umi also had some strange troubles. She spent quite a lot of money to buy it. The hair seller said that because it was made completely from real hair, the wig was very light and could be styled freely without fear of damage. At first, Umi was a little hesitant when hearing about real hair, but the hair seller said that because there was a girl short of money, cut her hair and sold it for a high price. Finally, Umi also decided to buy it. But every time I wore it, Umi also had an uncomfortable feeling. She sometimes sensed a strong smell of blood. Umi's body also suddenly appeared strange things. Umi's neck started to develop large blisters which made her very shy as well as painful. Even eating and drinking she did not feel good any longer because the fishy smell kept lingering in her nose, which made her moody all day at work. When getting home, Umi quickly took off her hair and put it on the wig stand. Then, without thinking much, Umi prepared the clothes and got into the bathroom. Umi thought maybe the body was too tired, which caused the taste not to be good. While taking a bath, Umi was also extremely alarmed because not only her neck but also her scalp began to develop blisters. It made her unable to scrub her scalp because she immediately felt painful when touching the blisters. Following that, it was hair loss. Every time she stroked or washed her hair, she was left with a handful of hair. It made Umi feel extremely sad. She quickly finished taking a shower and went to bed to relax. She thought that she had contracted a disease, so she planned to go to the hospital for a checkup on the weekend when she had a day off from work. But when she just slept for a while, the nightmare began to come and made Umi sweat all over the mattress. In dreams, she saw herself walking down a long corridor. The white walls had become very old, even darkened and smelled of smoke. Suddenly, Umi heard someone whispering in her ear, but she couldn't hear what the voice was talking about. She only knew that it was very deep and heavy. Suddenly, Umi felt someone behind her. Umi turned around reflexively. There was a woman standing a few feet away and looking at her. The scary thing was that the woman had a very creepy shape. She had no hair while her whole scalp was almost gone. Her eyes did not have pupils anymore but only two incredibly deep black eye sockets. She didn't say anything and didn't give Umi time to run away, but immediately rushed at Umi with an extremely angry expression. Her fingernails were so long that they were dug into Umi's neck, which made her breathe difficult and felt extreme pain. Umi tried to resist and then she woke up in fear. She put her hands on her neck to check. The pain was better. It was not like a normal dream, and it was clearly real that Umi was strangled. Suddenly, Umi's gaze found someone's shadow which imprinted on the blanket she was covering when she was alone in the house. Extremely frightened, she quickly turned her face to the direction of the black shadow. A woman with long hair that looked exactly like the wig Umi bought a few days before. She stood next to Umi's bed with long hair covering her whole face. Still the same deep and heavy voice from the recent nightmare, she slowly climbed into bed and approached Umi. Her face also began to be shown clearly behind the hair. It was the woman of her dreams. The rotten face of her Umi couldn't be mistaken. At this point, despite panicking, Umi told herself she couldn't just sit still like what she had done in a dream. Maybe that woman would kill her. Umi shrank back, leaned against the wall, and reached out her hand to turn on the light switch. Very soon after that, the whole room was lit up. As soon as there was light, the scary woman also disappeared. She left only the wig floating in the air. Of course, no one else wore it anymore, so it quickly fell from the air in front of Umi's eyes. After a few minutes of standing still because of being so surprised, Umi came closer and picked up the wig. In her mind at that moment, she was extremely scared. She also suddenly realized that her body had many strange things since wearing the wig. Frightened, Umi quickly called Hiro and explained everything. Soon, Hiro was at his girlfriend's house because Umi's voice was so panicky on the phone that Hiro was also worried. As soon as he entered the room, Hiro also felt the atmosphere was extremely uncomfortable, especially when standing in front of the wig. He also sensed a strong smell of blood in his nose. But looking at Umi's scared expression, Hiro told himself to calm down. He didn't dare say that he also smelled blood like Umi did, so Hiro tried to comfort her. He said that maybe it was just a dream. But Umi was very sure that when she saw the woman in her room, she was completely conscious, and Umi also remembered the woman's face clearly. While listening to Umi's story and feeling something unpleasant from the wig, Hiro did not refute Umi's words. He looked at the wig and pondered for a while. Then Hiro cheerfully told her to bring the hair back to the hair seller and tell him what had happened to her. The next day, two people went to the wig store very early and they told the whole story to the hair seller. But he was extremely annoyed. He thought that the couple was making up the story to return the hair to him. Realizing that it was not easy to give the wig back to the hair seller, Umi secretly pulled Hiro and told him to leave the store. Because of being failed in persuasion and getting told off by the seller, Hiro felt a little embarrassed in front of her. But Umi didn't care too much about it. What she focused on at that moment was just finding a way to get rid of the wig. Not knowing what to do, Umi was going to throw it in the trash, but Hiro was still wise enough to stop her. Umi's mood got worse and worse. She was so worried that she cried, because surely if she kept it, she would see the scary woman again that night. Hiro thought it was better to keep it and find out if it was cut before or after the woman died. Because if it was true that this girl had her hair stolen by someone else after she died, she would probably be very resentful. If Umi threw out her hair, it would make things worse. Umi also felt that Hiro's words made sense, but she didn't know what to do. Hiro put his hand on his chin to think for a moment. Then he concluded that only the woman knew where the hair came from, so he had to find a way to meet her again to solve their problem. So Hiro offered to bring the hair home. He would be the one to try it on. That night, Hiro put on a wig to prepare himself to meet the scary woman. Not long after lying down on the chair, he fell asleep and he got into the dream. But it was a happy dream. Hiro found himself eating a lot of delicious food and even drooling on his pillow. The next morning he woke up. All of his plans failed. He couldn't see that woman. Umi also soon arrived at Hiro's house. She saw him sitting contemplatively on the chair and she approached. After learning the boyfriend couldn't see anything, Umi suggested that she bring back the wig and see how it goes. It was a bit scary, but this was probably the only way to find out the truth. Umi put on the wig and sat down on the sofa. 10 minutes passed and there was still nothing out of the ordinary. But then, Umi's face completely changed. Her eyes became lifeless and cold, and her pupils also shrank to only the whites. The voice became deep and heavy. The sound came from Umi's mouth, but it was like coming from somewhere else. The woman entered Umi. She wanted them to give her hair back. Gathering the composure, Hiro asked her why her hair had been sold like that. She didn't answer, just lowered her head. Seeing that, Hiro also quickly persuaded her that for justice, he would return her hair. At that moment she replied that her hair was stolen by 2 men. Hiro asked if there were any clues that could find the men. The woman could only remember that it was a crematorium, and from the window she could see the mountain on the edge of the city. Before asking anything more, he saw Umi foaming at the mouth and faint. Feeling that something was wrong, Hiro quickly removed the hair from Umi's head. He feared that if it continued, her body could not stand any longer. They went to several crematoriums in the city. Indeed, there was a place that had a direct view of the mountain. They also reported to the police about the stolen hair. According to the investigation, the crematorium was often complained by customers that they deliberately appropriated the property of the dead before cremation. In a short time, the police collected a lot of evidence about property appropriation, so 2 men working there were arrested. According to the testimony, they received the woman's body to be cremated, but because they thought that the hair was too beautiful and would make a lot of money thanks to selling it, they decided to cut it. Then they would sell it to people who made wigs, and Umi accidentally bought it. But if they cut it off, it would depreciate while the woman's hair was too perfect. So they chose to strip her scalp. As we age, our appearances as well as bodies lose vitality, but many people refuse to admit it. The following story occurred in a small northern city, and the main character was a widow named San. Despite the fact that her husband died at a young age, San remained very strong. She had worked very hard to support her family and always wished to see her 2 children grow up. However, San was very lonely as her 2 children married and had their own families. They were also busy with work and had little time to visit her. They also rarely brought their children to visit her, though they frequently sent her money, which couldn't compensate for the void in her heart. San had also tried playing cards and traveling with a few close friends like everyone else, but this wasn't what she truly desired. San went out shopping today. She was walking down the street when she noticed a very familiar young man walking in front of her. She took a quick step forward and turned her head to look, finally catching a glimpse of his face. This person resembled her late husband. She couldn't help but be curious when she saw the strange man who looked exactly like her husband, so she quietly followed behind him. San inquired of a student standing in front of the school gate whether he attended the same school as the other young man.
"Yes, that's Kai, the best student in our school."
When San knew that the young man's name was Kai, she fell in love with him at first sight. However, as Kai became aware of San's tracking, he decided to deviate from his usual daily route. When San no longer saw Kai walking down those streets, she knew he'd realized he was being followed. San sighed every time she looked in the mirror at her wrinkled face, convinced that she was aging rapidly. San brought a sad mood that day. After eating, she went for a walk, unexpectedly bumping into Kai, making her feel a little embarrassed. San walked away quickly, thinking of the meeting just now. Her heart felt both happy and sad, mixed and intertwined. San ran fast for a long distance because she was still embarrassed. Kai was nowhere to be found when she turned her head to look back. San was still looking in his direction with a disappointed expression on her face when she turned her head and noticed a strange man standing right next to her. As if he could see through San's mind, this man asked her if she wanted to enter an official relationship with that person she secretly loved. When she noticed the strange man saying strange things, she tried to walk away, but was stopped by him. He wanted her to listen to what he was about to say. The man then took out a small bottle and handed it to Sun, explaining that it was called youth glue, and that simply applying it to her face would restore her youthful appearance. As if by magic, Sun subconsciously took the small bottle of youth glue. But then Sun appeared to awaken. She reacted as if she wanted to refuse, but the man had vanished. Sun wanted to throw away the strange little bottle, but she reconsidered. If this thing could truly restore her youth, she would give it a shot. When she got home, she anxiously took out the bottle, which contained a substance that was no different from regular glue except for the stamp written youth glue. She felt cheated because she had never heard of anyone applying glue to their faces and making them look younger, like an 18-year-old girl. But when she thought of Kai, then of that mysterious man, it was as if she were possessed by a demon, and a voice in her head urged her to use this glue as soon as possible. Sun couldn't resist the temptation and applied glue to her face before going to bed. She used up the entire bottle of glue. Sun felt cool and relaxed after applying it to her face, and she promptly fell asleep. It was only early in the morning. Sun couldn't wait to get up and look in the mirror as soon as she opened her eyes. Sun was taken aback when she saw herself in the mirror for the first time. She became younger and had regained her youthful appearance.
Wow!
Sun happily went out after changing clothes, looking forward to meeting Kai to express her feelings, and everyone on the street looked at her admiringly, making her very happy. There had even been some young men who had asked for Sun's contact information, but she rejected them all. So she went to Kai's school every day to meet him. She successfully caught Kai's attention, and they gradually got to know each other. Then she and Kai became lovers, as she wished for. Kai's appearance reminded her of her late husband every single time they met. Today, the two of them were out on the street shopping when her phone rang. Sun took it out and saw that it was her son calling. Sun hurriedly ran to another location to answer the phone, and Kai noticed that she appeared to be hiding something. After Sun hung up the phone, Kai inquired about the conversation. When Sun looked at Kai, she realized she couldn't tell the truth, so she devised a way to avoid it. Though everything would be alright, but recently, her son and daughter had been calling Sun alternately, making it difficult for her to explain to Kai each time. It turned out that because her appearance had changed, she didn't dare to meet her children, so she always made excuses not to see them. Her children were worried about their mother but were busy with work, so they could only care for her by calling her via phone. However, Kai was suspicious due to recent frequent phone calls. But every time Sun tried to avoid his question, Kai clearly didn't believe it any longer. To assuage his suspicions, she intercepted her children's phone calls whenever she left the house and spent money hiring young people to perform as her friends. But it didn't last long. After 3 months, the wrinkles on her face reappeared, and one day when she woke up, she had the appearance of an elderly woman. Kai was now calling her frequently, but Sun was afraid to respond, not knowing how to face him. Sun walked around the streets and alleys every day, hoping to catch a glimpse of her lover from afar. Just as she was about to give up, the mysterious man who had given her a bottle of youth glue appeared. She shed tears of joy when she saw that man, but the mysterious man did not take the youth glue out to give it to her, but instead made a request to her. Sun paused when he told her she had to trade her life. Sun was told to think twice about it after the mysterious man explained it to her. Sun thought about Kai and her husband who died young, so she was unconcerned about the consequences and accepted to trade youth glue from the man. She then reverted to her youthful beauty and returned to Kai once more. The two then rekindled their beautiful love, dreaming of a sweet home. But it didn't take long. This time the glue's effect lasted only a month before it faded, even though she looked much older than the last time. When she looked at her old face, she realized that the mysterious man meant if she kept using the glue, she would really die one day. Finally, Sun, unable to resist the desire of youth and love, set out to find the mysterious man. But before that, when she happened to run into Kai on the street, her elderly appearance clearly failed to make Kai recognize that the old woman in front of him was his lover. Sun's heart was broken as she looked at Kai's back. This time, Sun could easily meet the mysterious man. He continued to give Sun a new youth glue bottle after Sun determined that she would continue to use glue. However, the glue's effect lasted only a week this time. Sun finished from Kai for the third time a week later. Kai couldn't find her no matter how hard he tried. It wasn't until his son returned home that he discovered she had died. Sun's death appearance was strange. Her entire body transformed into a mummy, and she opened her mouth as if calling for something. Which would you choose? Health, youth, love, life, or family? Jin was a horror novel author. That day, she invited Jack, her new close friend, to drink milk tea to listen to him tell weird stories. Jack's village was inherently a secluded place and famous for its spiritual stories. Jack very happily began to tell his story because he had a big cup of milk tea. Let's talk about Jack's village first. It was a small remote village located in the northeast. This place was where Jack used to live all his childhood. The story began with a small quarrel between two women, Hanjin and Pin Lu. The girl with short hair, a fierce face, was Pin Lu. She believed that Hanjin deliberately seduced many men in the area while her husband was away on business. But Hanjin denied it. She said that Pin Lu was deliberately playing bad things to dishonor her. The more she argued, the more furious Pin Lu began to use offensive words against Hanjin. Seeing that, Hanjin's family also advised her to go back, not to pay attention to Pin Lu's words, because arguing in the street only made them embarrassed. Hearing the advice of her family, Hanjin quickly returned home. But before leaving, Hanjin cursed that Pin Lu would have to rot her face and die. However, Pin Lu did not care about that. For some reason, Pin Lu slept very soundly that night and didn't wake up until noon the next day. She also wondered why her husband did not wake her up. Everything in the house was quiet. She walked out the door and didn't see any movement. Very confused, so she decided to open the door and go out to see how it was outside. As soon as she opened the door, a certain liquid stirred from above, causing her to panic. Pin Lu immediately had to scream out of panic. A dead chicken, its head severed and blood pouring from it, was hanging in front of Pin Lu's house. The chicken's head, lying in the middle of the blood pool, was placed in the middle of the door. The scene was so scary. However, after regaining her composure, Pin Lu, who had a hot temper, immediately thought that it was because Hanjin was playing tricks, so she started to stand in front of the house and howled. But as soon as she spoke, her husband ran up to her from the beginning and stopped her. He told her to be quiet and go into the house. Pin Lu, of course, refused. She insisted on going to Hanjin's house to ask for clarification. At this time, seeing that his wife could not be stopped, the husband informed her with bad news. Last night, Hanjin had taken poison to commit suicide because her husband's family suspected her because of Pin Lu's words. They thought if Hanjin didn't do anything wrong, why would others say that? The husband also said that after Hanjin's death, Her family thought that Pin Lu made up the story, so she was humiliated and killed herself like that. This caused trouble for Pin Lu's family. Her husband wanted Pin Lu to stay at home for a while and didn't let them see, or something would happen. The matter was so serious, but Pin Lu still had a bad mouth and doubted Han Jin's death. She assumed that Han Jin was making excuses to make things go smoothly, and if Han Jin was really dead, it had nothing to do with her. The husband also had no way with his wife, urging her to go back inside to smooth things out. If Han Jin's family saw her, they'd probably beat her to death. But in the middle of the night, when her husband was fast asleep, Pin Lu sneaked out. She wanted to see with her own eyes that Han Jin was dead. She went to Han Jin's front door and saw her family members wearing mourning and standing at the door. Still not satisfied, she turned around to the back of the house and saw a large rock placed next to the wall, as if calling her to climb. Without hesitation, she climbed up to look inside. After struggling for a long time, she managed to climb to the top. But it was not known whether by coincidence or instigation, but the place she climbed up at the same time was the place where Han Jin's coffin and body were located. Due to suicide by drinking pesticides, Han Jin's face turned black like smoke, looking very unsightly. Han Jin's body, lying still in the coffin, suddenly moved, her eyes wide and bloodshot, looking at Pin Lu with hatred. Scared, Pin Lu panicked and fell backward, falling off the big rock. She didn't know where her face had hit, but there was a long cut on her cheek that looked like it was painful. But she didn't have time to care about that. She was scared, so she quickly returned to her home. But even in the days that followed, she could not sleep well. Nightmares kept coming to torment her. She always felt Han Jin's eyes staring at her. That made her startle awake and scream in panic, causing her husband to panic and wake up as well. She was sweating profusely now, and her face was full of fear. The wound on her face began to bleed again, drenching her entire face. That made the husband extremely worried, because at first the wound was just a shallow wound which stopped the bleeding and healed. He didn't understand why now it was cracked and seemed heavier. But because she thought it was just a small wound, Pin Lu also bandaged it up and resumed normal activities. But it was not over yet. In the days that followed, even during the day, Pin Lu had to live in fear, because she always felt that Han Jin was watching her from afar. Han Jin's figure kept appearing before her eyes. Sometimes Han Jin hovered and looked at her over the fence wall with an angry expression, as if she wanted to eat Pin Lu alive. Panicked, Pin Lu threw away the bundle of clothes she was crocheting and ran into the house to hide. That night, Pin Lu could not sleep, tossing and turning because of fear. She glanced around to see if Han Jin would appear again. But the strange thing was that the wound on her face became more and more itchy and uncomfortable. She unconsciously scratched the wound with her hand, causing her wound to bleed again, drenching the bandage and soaking it all out. The husband heard his wife's cry and woke up, asking Pin Lu what had happened. She cried and panicked and told her husband that her wound was suddenly so itchy that she couldn't stand it anymore. Seeing that his wife was uncomfortable, the husband also helped her remove the bandage to see the wound inside. But as soon as he saw it, her husband panicked. Pin Lu's face was disfigured. The wound from the beginning had now begun to seriously ulcerate and rot. Every patch of skin on her cheek was rotting to the point of falling apart. The flesh inside could be seen and even emitting a very foul stench. From that day on, she started going crazy, always saying she saw Han Jin looking at her or attacking her, to the point that her family had to lock her in a warehouse because when she went crazy, she would run around screaming and attack others. She also repeatedly knelt begging Hanjin to spare her life, even though in front of her was devoid of any figure. Everyone assumed that she was crazy, so she was paranoid. One day, her husband brought rice as usual when he found out that she had committed suicide by drinking pesticide. Even her husband didn't know where she ended up getting the potion, but he was sure it was Hanjin's doing. Because before Pinlu died, the husband saw Hanjin, but at that time he thought it was because he was dizzy. That night, the husband was sitting in the house because he was sad, so he drank alone. He then heard his wife's screams coming from the warehouse. Looking in that direction, only a few meters away from the room, he caught a glimpse of a woman's silhouette hovering outside the warehouse window. Wanting to see better, he stood up and opened the window when the figure was gone. At that time, he thought it was because he was looking at it wrong. Jack drank milk tea while telling the story excitedly. Jin also felt that the story was scary. It was right not to offend anyone, or there would be unexpected consequences. Jack said he still had a lot of good stories, so he would slowly tell Jin later.
The story took place in 2003 in a small town called Wan'an in Shangpu County, Shangzhou City, Fujian Province, China. During the summer vacation that year, the town cut down an old tree to build the library. This tree was growing in the schoolyard. The big tree was many years old. The tree bark was very thick but did not appear to be a precious tree. The tree trunk was so overgrown that it had to be cut down. When adults were busy with work, naughty kids never lost this joy. After the workers cut down the tree, someone was trying to dig up this giant stump. But the stump was large and so hard to dig up. We took advantage of their digging to find all sorts of things to play with from the tree stump. We were hoping to find something interesting inside the stump. After a few of my friends picked up the silkworms, I was also a bit worried because I didn't know if there was anything else I could pick up. When I saw the deep hole at the tree base, I lay down on the ground and looked inside to see if anything was left. But it was so dark inside I couldn't see anything. I could only reach in with my hands and guess whether there was something in or not. After rummaging around for a while, I finally found something strange in the soil and roots. I secretly hoped it was a good item. I took it out and looked at it. It was a coal black ball and looked very mysterious. It looked like it would be interesting. I thought I had got much better stuff than my friends and their rock. I was afraid that the black ball would be snatched by my friends. Therefore, I didn't say anything to anyone about the coal black ball. I silently picked it up and hid it in my body. We played for a while and it was getting dark. I brought this mysterious black ball home with joy and excitement. My father was working at a fish process factory in town. Every day he worked overtime, and every time he came home late. Seeing me bring back the strange ball, my mother blamed me for picking up something so dirty. After eating, I went back to my room to rest. My mother reminded me to take a shower, change my clothes and throw away that dirty black lump. But I didn't expect my nightmare to start from that moment. Really terrible. At 10 o'clock in the evening, it was pitch black outside with no streetlights. The scene became quiet and scary. At this time, my father got home from work. My mother left the food for him and waited for him to come home to eat. My father did not forget to ask my mother if I had gone to bed. My mother also replied that I had long gone to bed after a long day of playing. At that time, the East China Sea also had a lengthy fishing ban. Summer was the peak fishing season. My dad would be very busy. Almost all summer I didn't see him. But on the day when fishing was banned, Dad would be free. My mother and I were used to my father's work arrangement. That day I heard my mother tell me that the night when my father came home and was preparing to eat, my parents heard a loud sound of objects falling from my room. They all thought that I hadn't slept yet. My parents believed that I was naughty in the room. "Looks like our son hasn't slept," my father said. At that time, my mother was a very disciplined and strict person. Hearing noises in the room, my mother wanted to scold me. She got up and went into my room. As soon as she opened the door, she cursed into my room. My mother asked me why I hadn't slept yet but disturbed my father like that. He was eating rice after a busy day. But when my mother opened the door and looked into my room, she was shocked to see the scene before her eyes. My mother said that I wasn't sleeping in my bed but hanging myself from the curtain wire. Because the curtain cord was too tight and blood could not flow through, my face was as white as suffocation and my pupils kept turning white. My father heard my mother's screams and ran to my room immediately. My father screamed in horror when he saw me hanging. Together, the two of them hugged me down from the window. I even didn't realize that because I was unconscious. They put me on the bed and patted my chest and back for a long time. My mother was so scared that she cried a lot. Due to being discovered and rescued in time, I finally woke up. I tried to recall and tell them about a nightmare I had just had, but my mother said that they didn't think they had seen a ghost at that time. They thought I might be sleepwalking or have some sort of psychological problem, but this incident scared both. My parents let me sleep in their room and they watched over me all night. However, that terrible situation did not reappear all night. My parents slowly breathed a sigh of relief. The next day my father went to work again. My mother was worried and did not want me to hang out because what happened to me last night still scared her very much. But I could feel that I was perfectly fine. I didn't feel comfortable at home. I wanted to meet a classmate, so I asked my mother's permission to go out. My mother told me to remember to come back soon. I ran to the square in the center of town with a close school friend. We laughed and talked a lot with each other. For more than 1 hour I had fun with my friends. My mother washed clothes and prepared everything without me and my father. Suddenly a friend who was playing with me came to my house and told my mother that something had happened to me. And he told my mother about the horrible experience I had outside. My friend said I was almost hanged and was being taken to the clinic. At that time I was taken to the clinic in town. My mother ran there with my classmate. As soon as I entered the clinic, my mother saw me lying on the hospital bed in an unconscious state. My mother later recounted that I had a deep knot on my neck at that time. My blood was oozing out a lot. I had suffered severe blood loss. The doctor said that fortunately I was treated in time. It was not life-threatening. My breathing and heart rate were normal, but somehow I was still unconscious. Both my mother and the doctor felt that my problem was not simple, so they asked a friend who played with me what went on. My friend said what just happened was scary. We encountered a ghost, and that ghost almost killed me. My friend told them that we played games together in the gym area of the street park in the morning. They suddenly saw me walking to the woods in the park alone. My friends didn't know why I was acting so weird. They all thought I found something hilarious inside. 2 of my friends followed me and went into the forest, but my friends saw me standing under a big tree. They called me twice, but I didn't answer. Instead, I started climbing to the top of the big tree without a sound. They called me several more times, but I still didn't answer. They stood below to see what I would do when I climbed the tree. But my friends saw that besides me there was another terrible thing in the tree that made them shocked. It was a female ghost wearing a red dress. The ghost looked hideous and scary. That female ghost was holding my hand and pulling me up the tree. After I was pulled up the tree, the female ghost hung me with a prepared noose on a tree branch. I didn't know why I didn't have any struggle or resistance at the time. The female ghost disappeared after hanging me. I was strangled and stuck out my tongue right after. My friends who witnessed the incident quickly screamed and called for the adults nearby to save me and take me to the medical station. At first, my mother and the doctor did not believe my friend's description, but the doctor took my hand and found a dark handprint on my wrist. This made them believe what my friend said. Then the doctor also found the mysterious black ball that I was holding in my hand. After learning that this ball was picked up from under the tree, the doctor recognized the problem. He was equally alarmed. The doctor said that maybe this ball was made up of the resentment of the person who hanged himself after death, and it lay on the soil under the body of the hangman. About what the doctor said, I also checked it myself. It was also recorded in the medical record of the medical examiner. Later, when my father heard the news, he ran into the hospital to visit me and was instructed to burn the other black ball in the garden with a peach branch. As soon as my dad burned it, I hadn't been hanged for any reason since. Everything was back to normal. The formation of a black ball in the soil at the feet of a dead person by hanging has not been scientifically proven, but there were many records such as Xingyu Lu and other ancient books.
I am an introvert and full of curiosity. I thought that my personality would have no impact until one day it brought me to a strange and terrifying event. I usually observed the surrounding street from the apartment's window through the binoculars. Over time, I enjoyed looking at the view of the warehouse below, across from my apartment, and watching the scene of daily life here. I could secretly see a lot of people, from the workers working in the warehouse to the women busy shopping across the block. Until the scene of children playing on the roadside, all in my eyes was a beautiful scene that I didn't want to forget. Seeing the world around me through the small binocular was a happy thing for an introvert and shy person like me. I could freely explore the interesting life out there through the binoculars. But this thing did not mean that my relationship with those around me would be affected. I was still popular with the neighbors who lived on the same block, and every day I met them, I happily said hello to them. Then, like every other day, I would go to the bus stop near my house to catch the earliest bus to my workplace, starting a busy day at the office. I also found it interesting to sit on the bus like this when I could directly see the people around me glued to their phones instead of observing the surrounding life. Contrary to them, I didn't look at my phone too much. Instead, I liked to open the bus window and watch the street outside. On the bus, I could see with my own eyes the old warehouse opposite my apartment, which I always saw first in the morning when I looked into my binoculars. This time, I no longer saw the workers working there, but instead, a girl in a red dress standing in front of the warehouse. The young girl stood facing the wall, looking very mysterious, but strangely, the people around did not care about this girl's existence. She stood there for a long time, not knowing what she was looking at, but seemed very attentive, not paying attention to the flow of people behind her. This thing also made me curious. I kept watching the girl because of the strangeness she radiated around and caught my attention, but then I also considered this a common thing. I no longer paid attention to the strange girl, but continued to sit in my seat, calmly waiting for the bus to take me to the office. Day after day, my hectic work schedule made looking at the street through the binoculars less and less because I had to go to the office every day. I continued to the bus stop and waited for my first bus of the day. I continued to choose a chair close to the window so I could see the opposite curb and freely open the window, putting my head out to admire the scenery. I kept walking past the old warehouse. The warehouse still didn't open. The door was closed for days, but what surprised me was not the shutdown of this place. I kept seeing the strange girl in the red dress again. She was still standing in the same position with her eyes fixed on the wall. I began to be a little surprised and confused when I did not know why this young girl was always standing in such a position. The incomprehension unknowingly made my mind uneasy. Even though the bus had passed a warehouse, I couldn't help but turn my gaze to the strange girl. That night I worked overtime and got home pretty late. That's why I couldn't take the bus home as usual, but had to choose to walk. But thanks to that, I was able to walk past the old warehouse and meet the girl who worked at a restaurant next door. After greeting the girl for a few sentences, I continued to walk back to my apartment. The road from the warehouse to my apartment was only one intersection apart, so it didn't make me tired. On the way I also met many people, including a white-haired older man walking in the opposite direction from me. After that, I passed the old warehouse again and continued to meet the strange girl who was still in the same position as in the morning. This time, I was able to see the girl with my own eyes, to see her strangeness and mystery more clearly. I suddenly felt a bit cold when I saw a young girl standing with her face against a wall like that. I moved closer to the girl, clearly feeling her coldness. The girl stood like that for a long time. For fear of her finding out, I pretended to hold the phone as if I was texting someone. After that, I tried to make a phone call, but my eyes didn't stop moving toward the young girl. But thanks to that, I could see the abnormality of the girl. The young girl looked a bit sad, but her face was dim. I stood with her for a long time and then came back to my apartment. The following morning I sat on the bus again and passed the warehouse. At this time, I just asked people around and found out that this warehouse had stopped working. But what intrigued me was the connection between the young girl and the warehouse. I accidentally discovered something happening in front of the warehouse on the way. A crowd of people stood around, crowded in front of the warehouse. I didn't know what was going on, but I had a feeling something was wrong. I hurriedly signaled to stop the bus and then ran from the bus to the other warehouse. I felt worried for that strange girl. I didn't know what was happening to her. When I arrived, I saw the presence of the police. Everything was quite serious. A young man was escorted to the station by the police in the crowd. I came to the older man that I often met to ask what was going on. As soon as the older man saw me, he told me there was a serious case here. The police were hunting for the guy who threw the acid on the young girl there a few days ago, and the press was reporting it. I panicked, not thinking that the girl in trouble was the girl I had met before. I couldn't sleep that night because I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I stayed awake until the middle of the night when I decided to search for the strange things. I started to open my computer and search for information on this case. It turned out that this young man had a crush on a young girl I met, but the girl had no feelings, so she repeatedly rejected the guy. But everything would be okay if the young girl's refusal inadvertently made the guy feel hurt. Since then, the man had held a grudge, determined to take revenge and find ways to harm the young girl. It happened a long time ago, and until now the killer had been arrested. That dead girl was the girl I met. This girl died before I met her, and the scene of the crime was in front of the warehouse where I met the young girl. I was shocked to see the news and felt extremely strange and scared. After a while, my computer suddenly had trouble, causing me to panic. Suddenly, a clip was sent out of nowhere to my computer. The person in the clip was the girl in trouble. This time the girl called out to me and slowly turned her face to look at me, but her face was destroyed by acid, making me feel extremely haunted, so I quickly turned off the computer. But I still heard that young girl's voice echoing on the computer, so I ran away. I ran out of my room and headed for the stairs. While running downstairs, I suddenly felt someone push me from behind. I immediately fell to the ground from above in pain. I tried to get up, but my legs started to throb, and I couldn't move anymore. I had to use all my strength to run away from this ghostly building. But the more I ran, the more I felt like I was lost at the starting point. In front of my eyes also appeared the figure of the girl in red. The girl asked me why I stopped following her and looked at me with a disfigured face. So I was scared that I couldn't speak. My whole body started to shake. But a moment later, the red-dressed girl disappeared. Because of that, I fell to the ground, unable to regain my astral soul. Suddenly, beside me appeared a voice calling my name. When I looked up, I saw the girl next door on the same floor as me, looking at me with worry. The girl asked me because she was afraid I would fall down the stairs, but I could not answer. In my heart at that time, I was constantly afraid of the horror story with the dead red-dressed girl. I did not dare to sleep in my apartment that night, but went to a friend's apartment to ask for shelter. The following morning, I met a colleague with the same interests. I called my colleague and told him what I needed to say. I advised him not to look at strange things anymore. I also had an amulet on my neck at that time, in the hope that I would never experience horror stories like this again.
At the end of the year, my neighborhood suddenly built an exhibition area. Just a few days ago, the exhibition area had quickly attracted so many people. Most of the paintings here depicted women from many different countries with different expressions and nuances. Because the exhibition area just finished building, there was still an opening position as a night shift security guard with a fairly stable salary, so I took that opportunity to apply to work here, both to earn more income and to be convenient for my studies. After discussing with the manager, who was also an old security guard, in the morning I could rest and work the night shift. Because of the nature of my job, I would usually work in the computer room to watch the security cameras, do a few rounds of preliminary checks until the middle of the night, then start taking a nap with the manager. My first day at work began. At that time it was already dark and the visitors had already left. In the exhibition area, there were only me and the older security guard. He took me on a tour around, said I knew the way here and taught me things to keep in mind when working. He took me to a gallery hidden in a far corner. This gallery wasn't mentioned before, so it made me curious. He told me this was the owner's private gallery and the duty of the security guard that night was to strictly inspect the gallery. This was strange because I had never heard of or mentioned this mysterious gallery since then. But for a newbie like me, this was not something I needed to worry about, so I just needed to take a look to know. In the middle of the night, the older security guard took me to the secret gallery, where people were not allowed to go without permission. The cold atmosphere in that place attracted me, but the security guard told me no matter what, when passing that gallery I mustn't discuss, comment or say anything, and especially I should not go in there alone. The mystery of this gallery made me even more curious. I wanted to go inside once to experience it. I asked the security guard why there were such regulations here, but before he could reply, he received a phone call that seemed important. So before he could answer my question, he said he had an important job and he had to go out. After that, he went straight out of the duty room, leaving me alone in the room with many unanswered questions. In the meantime, I scrolled through my phone in boredom, but I didn't see him back until late at night, so I made a reckless decision. I slightly looked at the clock. It was past midnight. I knew that the other security guard was busy, so I thought about going alone to be able to rest early, later. No sooner than later, I grabbed the flashlight and left the duty room alone, heading straight for the secret gallery outside. Walking a few steps, I finally reached the gallery full of mysteries. The surrounding space was also strangely dark, which made me a little cold. I couldn't take my eyes off the door of the room. There was some invisible power that kept urging me to go inside, but then I decided to turn back because I couldn't stand the cold air. I had just turned my back when suddenly a woman's giggle rang out in the room. I immediately returned to the secret gallery and assumed that someone was in the gallery. I decided to ignore the other security guard's advice. I brought the flashlight inside and carefully checked every corner of the room. But when I went inside, this room had nothing too special to attract me, but an empty room with nothing in it. Suddenly, I had the feeling that someone was watching me from behind with cold, blood-red eyes.
I immediately turned around and found an oil painting hanging in the middle of the room, depicting a beautiful young girl fiddling with a favorite flower. I didn't know who the woman in this picture was, but the content of the painting was nothing special for everyone here to keep it a secret. I was impressed with the sad eyes of the girl in the picture. It seemed that in her heart there was an indescribable pain. After seeing the picture, I was going to go back to my duty room, but at that moment the girl's eyes suddenly started bleeding. The girl looked like she was crying, but her eyes were bright red, which made me scared, shaking. After a while, I felt like I was trapped in this gallery with a pool of crimson blood on the floor. It was like being drowned by the blood tears of the girl in the picture. The scene was so horrible that I couldn't forget it. The girl's tears suddenly turned fierce like a wave that wanted to rush me out of the room. After struggling for a while, I thought I would lose my life, but I woke up and found myself sitting in the room on duty without knowing it. I screamed in fear and regained my composure. The other security guard saw that I was fully awake. He sat down across from me and asked why I was alone in there and if I had seen anything strange. I didn't hide it from him and told him the whole scene that I saw in that secret gallery. I thought that he would not believe me, but he reassured me and said not only me but the people who worked in the past, anyone who entered the gallery alone had the same problem. I knew it all started with the only picture hanging in the room, so I immediately asked him the origin of that painting. The security guard originally planned not to tell me because he was worried about me and he was too afraid to think about it. So after seeing my accident, he knew he couldn't hide it anymore. The security guard told me that in the past this painting was sold by a rich businessman who liked to collect antique paintings. Many rich people hunt for a painting not because of its content or because its creator was a famous artist, but because of the paint color used to paint this picture. The artist who painted the picture was called a mad painter, a pervert with a strong passion for painting. When making this painting, the artist felt unsatisfied with his work, so he devised a new way of mixing colors to make the picture look more real. He kidnapped young girls around the same age as the girl in the picture and secretly brought them home. After that, he killed the victims and then drained the victims' blood, using it to color the paintings. He mixed the victims' blood into the palette, used it to draw the first strokes of the work. As he thought, the colors after being mixed with blood also became more vivid. In just 1 week he was able to complete the painting with emotional strokes, but with sadness and a bit of gloom. Many people also say that when painting, he would leave the victim's body behind, facing the painting as a way for the victims to see his work. The souls of the victims who were killed by him accidentally breathed their souls into the painting, making the painting famous but also a way for the victims' souls to reside inside the painting. After finishing, he had not time to enjoy and look at his work when the police suddenly rushed in and arrested him. The artist was later sentenced to death, but the case of the painter using blood became a hot topic of discussion everywhere. The painting had since been cursed as well, but it had been hunted by many rich people and passed on from person to person. The guards were on duty at night in the exhibition area. If they went alone at night, they would be teased by the spirits of the girls in the paintings, threatened to faint, and because they were too scared, they then resigned. Therefore, the owner of this exhibition had banned anyone from going to the secret gallery alone, especially at night. The secret guard knew that I was also curious about the painting, but he specifically said that he would take me inside to see it in detail. This time, I went back. The picture was a little softer than the original, and no more strange things happened. I looked at the picture for a long time. Felt the eyes of the girl in the picture as if she was watching me. After a while, the security guard took me out, ended the shift, and began to rest when it was almost morning. The painting is still there. Unfortunately, this was a beautiful work of art, but no one would admire it.